I spent 43 years working with my hands before I ever learned to stand up for myself. That's the part that still gets me. Even now. Sitting here on the back veranda with a cold beer, and more quiet than I've had in years. You'd think a man who spent 4 decades as a boilermaker at a refinery in Geelong would know something about pressure, when to hold it, when to let it blow. But when it came to my own marriage, I let things simmer for so long that by the time the whole thing finally cracked, I'd nearly forgotten who I was underneath all the rust. My name is Graham. I'm 64 years old. And this is the story of how my wife humiliated me in front of 30 people at a corporate Christmas party, and how walking out that door was the best thing I ever did in my life. I met Diane at a pub in Ballarat in 1987. I was 26, she was 23, and she had this laugh that made the whole room turn around to see who it belonged to. We got married 2 years later. Nothing fancy, a backyard in Corio. Her mum's potato salad. My uncle's bad jokes. We were broke and happy, which is the best kind of broke there is. The early years were good. Genuinely good. We bought a place out in Lara, when the prices were still something a working man could manage. We talked about kids, talked about getting a dog, talked about the kind of life you build slowly with your own 2 hands. Diane was working in admin at a logistics company, and I was clocking long shifts at the refinery, and we'd meet in the middle at the kitchen table every night and eat and talk and be a team. We lost our first pregnancy in 1994. It was early, only about 10 weeks, and the doctor said it was common, said it happened more often than people talked about, said we could try again. And we did try. But something shifted in Diane after that. I didn't have the words for it then. I'm not sure I have the right words for it even now. It was like she looked at the future we'd been building together, and quietly, without telling me, changed the floor plan. She went back to work faster than I expected. She started staying later. She started talking about a promotion the way she used to talk about a family. I told myself it was how she was coping. I told myself she'd come back around. I waited. And I kept waiting. And I got so good at waiting that I stopped noticing the years going by. By 2003, she was a senior operations manager. By 2008, she'd moved into a national logistics consultancy with a city office in Melbourne. I was proud of her. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely proud. She was sharp and driven, and she'd built something real. But somewhere along the way, the life we were supposed to be building together became the background to the life she was building for herself. And I became part of the background too. I don't think she did it on purpose. That's the honest truth. I don't think Diane ever sat down and decided to make me smaller. I think it happened the way most things happen in a long marriage, gradually, quietly, until one day you wake up and you don't quite recognize the person across the table or the one in the mirror. The first time I heard the name Marcus, I was heating up leftover pasta on a Tuesday night because she'd called to say the team was having a quick debrief after a client presentation, and she'd grabbed something in the city. Marcus was the new national director, she told me. Very sharp. Good energy. Really turning the culture around. Fine. Workplaces have people in them. People have names. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been. I trusted my wife. But over the next few months, Marcus came up more and more. Marcus thought the Melbourne branch should restructure. Marcus had a great take on the quarterly numbers. Marcus had recommended a restaurant in South Yarra that Diane said we should try together sometime, though we never did get around to it. Little things. Each one nothing on its own. But they started to add up the way small debts do quietly. In the dark, until suddenly you're in over your head and you can't remember when it started. I noticed she started paying more attention to how she dressed. Now, Diane had always been well presented. That wasn't new. But there's a difference between looking professional and dressing for someone specific. I couldn't have told you exactly what the difference was. Only that I felt it. New blazers. Different perfume. The The way she'd check herself in the hallway mirror before she left. A fraction longer than she used to. I brought it up once. Gently. Told her it felt like we'd been disconnecting. Like I missed her. She told me I was being needy, that she was under enormous pressure at work, and the last thing she needed was to come home to insecurity. I backed down. Told her she was right. Told myself I was imagining things. That was the first time I felt genuinely ashamed of myself, not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd felt something real, and then apologized for feeling it. The Christmas party was in early December 2018. Diane's company held it every year at a function center in Docklands, one of those glass and steel venues where everything looks expensive and nothing feels warm. She'd been talking about it for weeks. The company had had a strong year. Marcus had presented to the board, and everyone was celebrating. She asked me to come, which surprised me a little. The previous 2 years I'd been given the option, and she'd seemed almost relieved when I'd said I'd rather skip it. This year she said she wanted me there. So I ironed a good shirt. I got a haircut. I drove into the city on a Friday evening feeling something I hadn't felt in a while, like I was being included. The room was full by the time we arrived. Open bar. Catered finger food. A DJ who was playing something low and jazzy that I couldn't name. Diane seemed immediately at home. She knew everyone. They knew her, and she moved through the crowd with this ease that she never had at home anymore. I followed her around for the first 20 minutes, meeting people whose names I immediately forgot, shaking hands, smiling, saying I was in the trades, retired now, mostly while people nodded politely and moved on. Then Marcus appeared. I knew it was him before she said the name. Not because of anything dramatic, just because of the way her whole body changed when she saw him. She lit up. Not the way you light up when you're happy to see a colleague, the way you light up when someone you've been thinking about all week is suddenly standing in front of you. He was about 50, maybe a bit younger. Fit-looking bloke, good suit, the kind of easy confidence that comes from having people listen to you for a long time. He greeted Diane first, and they did one of those half hugs that I've come to think of as the most dishonest gesture in the social repertoire, close enough to feel, far enough to deny. Then she turned to introduce me. "This is Graham," she said. "My husband." 2 words. My husband. No name. "No, this is Graham. We've been married for 29 years. "No. Graham's the one I told you about. Just my husband." Like a footnote. Like a category rather than a person. Marcus shook my hand and said something pleasant. I said something back. I have no idea what either of us said because I was still standing inside those 2 words trying to figure out why they felt like a door closing. We stayed for another hour. In that hour, I watched my wife move through that room, and I watched how different she was around Marcus. Attentive. Animated. She stood closer to him than she stood to me. She laughed more easily. At one point, a small group had formed around the 2 of them, a natural orbit, the kind that forms around people who enjoy each other's company. And I was standing about 2 meters to the side with a drink in my hand and nowhere to put my eyes. My mate Kevin, who I'd gone to school with in Norlane, used to say, "There's knowing something, and there's seeing it, and they're not the same thing." He was right. I'd known something was off for a long time. That night I saw it. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. But somewhere around 9 o'clock, I put my glass down on a passing waiter's tray and walked over to Diane and told her, quietly, that I was going to head off. She looked mildly surprised, asked if I was all right. I said I was fine, just tired. She said she'd get a cab home later with some of the team. I nodded. I walked out through those glass doors and into the cool night air, and I stood on the footpath for a moment, feeling the city noise wash over me. And then I drove home to Lara alone, and I sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. And I made a decision. I didn't say anything to Diane that night when she got home. And I didn't say anything the next morning over coffee. I sat with it through the weekend. I sat with it the way I'd been taught to sit with problems at work. Assess. Don't react. Think it through properly before you act. By Monday, I'd called a solicitor. Not because I had proof of anything. I want to be honest about that. I never found a message or a hotel receipt or any of the things people imagine when they think of these situations. What I had was 29 years of experience with one woman, and a gut that had been trying to tell me something for 2 years, and a night in Docklands that finally made me listen to it. The solicitor, a woman called Patricia who worked out of a little office in Geelong CBD, asked me what outcome I was hoping for. I told her I wanted to stay in the house. She nodded like I was the first person who'd ever thought to ask for that. And then she told me what my rights were. And we started from there. I told Diane on a Wednesday evening in January. We were sitting at the same kitchen table where we'd been eating together for 27 years. I told her I wasn't happy, that I hadn't been for a long time, and that I thought we were better off apart. I told her I'd spoken to a solicitor and that I intended to stay in the house and that I'd been advised that was a reasonable position. She cried. That surprised me. I don't know why. She said she didn't want to lose me. She said things had just been hard, that the pressure at work had changed her, that she knew she'd been distant. She said nothing about Marcus. I listened to all of it. And then I said, Diane, I think you're telling me the truth about some of that. But I also think the truth we're not talking about is the bigger one, and I'm tired of not talking about it. She didn't deny anything. She also didn't confirm anything. She just sat there and cried, and I sat there and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not triumph, not even grief. Exactly. I felt clear. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see the outline of myself again. The next 6 months were hard in the way that transitions are hard: paperwork and conversations, and the grinding bureaucracy of undoing a life that two people built together. We were civil, which I think we both deserved credit for. There were moments that were genuinely sad. 30 years of shared history doesn't disappear because the marriage does. You grieve it, even when the ending was right. Diane moved into a rental in Geelong West. I kept the house in Lara. I repainted the bedroom, a dark green, which sounds like a small thing but felt enormous. I started going back to the bowling club on Thursday nights, which I'd stopped doing years ago because it was my thing, and our schedules never lined up. I called Kevin Moore. I started cooking properly, not just reheating things, but actually cooking, with fresh vegetables from the Corio market on Saturday mornings, the way my mum used to do. I want to tell you it all clicked into place immediately. That the moment I made the decision, everything became easy. That's not how it works. There were nights in the first few months when I sat in that green-painted bedroom and felt the silence like a weight. 63 years old, alone in a house that creaked, wondering if I'd waited too long to do any of this, wondering if it would have mattered, if I'd spoken up sooner, wondering if a man my age had the energy for whatever came next. But then morning would come, and I'd make a decent coffee and sit out the back watching the birds on the back fence. And it would occur to me that I felt okay. Not miserable, not broken, just okay, in a quiet and honest way that I hadn't felt in a very long time. There's a bloke I know from the refinery days, retired now, lives up near Ballarat on a bit of land, who once told me that the hardest thing about getting older is that most men keep waiting for someone else to give them permission to change their own lives. His wife had left him in his 50s, and he'd said it was the making of him, even though it was also the worst thing that ever happened to him. I remember thinking at the time that it sounded like something you put on a wall calendar. I don't think that anymore. I've thought a lot about what I would tell a younger version of myself. The bloke sitting across from Diane in that backyard in Corio in 1989. All sunburn and cheap wine and certainty about how things were going to go. I wouldn't tell him not to marry her. I genuinely wouldn't. The early years were real, and they mattered, and they made me who I am. But I would tell him a few things I had to learn the hard way. The first is this: when your gut tells you something, listen to it. Don't explain it away. Don't wait for it to become undeniable before you act on it. Your instincts have more experience than your logic does. The second is, silence is not the same as peace. I spent years not saying things because I didn't want to cause conflict, and all I did was trade small discomforts for a larger one. The conversations you avoid don't go away, they just get heavier. The third is something my old union rep used to say about safety in the workplace. If you don't advocate for yourself, you're teaching people how to treat you. I spent too long accepting things that should have been talked about, questioned, renegotiated. That's not humility. That's abdication. And the fourth, the one that took me the longest to understand, is that self-respect isn't something you protect by staying. Sometimes it's something you recover by leaving. I'm 64 now. I still live in the house in Lara. My daughter Claire, she's from Diane's first relationship. I've been her stepfather since she was 8. Still rings me on a Sunday, and we get along better now than we did when things at home were fractured. My granddaughter is 4 years old and she calls me Pop, and she thinks the back veranda where I drink my beer is the most interesting place in the world because of the birds. It's enough. More than enough. It took me a long time to stop seeing that as a consolation and start seeing it as a life. Not every marriage that goes quiet is dying. Not every distant partner is unfaithful. People go through seasons. They carry grief in strange ways. They lose themselves, and sometimes they find their way back. I'm not telling this story to make a villain of anyone. Diane was a complicated person doing the best she could with a life that had its own disappointments in it. I understand that now in a way I couldn't when I was in the middle of it, but I am saying this. Don't let the years make you a stranger to yourself. Don't let the habit of keeping the peace become the habit of disappearing. And if the person who is supposed to stand beside you introduces you to the world as a footnote, if they look at someone else the way they used to look at you, right there in front of you, and they think you won't notice or won't do anything about it, well, they might be wrong about that. The night I walked out of that party in Docklands, I didn't say a dramatic word. I didn't need to. I put down my glass. I thanked the waiter. And I walked through those glass doors out into a cool Melbourne night, and I went home. And that was the first step I'd taken in years that was entirely, completely, undeniably mine. I've had a lot of time to think about all of it. That's one of the things nobody tells you about getting older. You end up with more time for thinking than you ever expected. And not all of it is comfortable. What strikes me most, looking back, is how long I mistook endurance for strength. I genuinely believed that staying quiet, keeping the peace, not making things difficult, that all of that was something to be proud of. And maybe some of it was. But there's a point where patience stops being a virtue and starts being a way of avoiding a hard conversation you should have had years ago. I crossed that line somewhere in the middle of a long marriage, and I kept walking past it for longer than I should have. The thing about cause and effect, real cause and effect, the kind that plays out over years rather than days, is that it's almost invisible while it's happening. Every time I backed down when I should have spoken up, every time I told myself I was imagining things, every time I apologized for having a feeling that turned out to be completely justified, each one of those moments was a small decision. And small decisions compound. That's true in finances, and it's true in relationships, and it's true in the way a person comes to understand their own worth. By the time I was standing in that room in Docklands watching Diane light up for someone who wasn't me, I was already the sum of 1,000 small retreats. I don't say any of this to be hard on myself. That's not useful at 64. I say it because I think a lot of men, particularly men of my generation, men who were taught that stoicism and sacrifice were the same thing, end up in some version of this story. We were raised to provide and to endure, and those are genuinely good qualities. But somewhere along the way, a lot of us forgot to also advocate for ourselves. We forgot that a relationship is meant to be a partnership, and a partnership requires two people who are honest with each other, including about what's not working. The wisdom I had to earn the hard way is this. Integrity isn't just about how you treat other people. It's also about how truthful you're willing to be with yourself. For years, I knew something wasn't right, and I chose the comfort of uncertainty over the disruption of truth. That cost me time I won't get back, but it also taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way, that the version of yourself you protect by staying silent is not actually worth protecting. The real thing, the solid thing, only shows up when you're honest enough to face what's in front of you. And the courage it takes to do that, to put down your glass quietly in a crowded room and walk out with your head up, not because you're angry, but because you finally respect yourself enough to leave. That kind of courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make speeches. It just acts. And then it goes home and sits in the driveway for a while and breathes. And in the morning it makes a decent coffee and watches the birds. And it decides to keep going. That's the only version of strength I have any faith in anymore. The quiet kind. The kind that took me most of my life to find.